Hi, welcome to another episode of Inclusion by Design. I'm your host, Uma Chatterjee. In this podcast, we talk about the what, why, and how of social inclusion and equity, getting a seat at the table not as a matter of charity, but as a matter of justice. My guests today are Piya and Kathakali from Anjali Mental Health Rights Organizations. It's a pleasure to have them on this episode. Anjali has been working on the social inclusion and integration of people living with mental challenges, mental difficulties, emotional difficulties, and this conversation is going to dive deeper into that, the what, why, and how. So, Piya and Katha, very, very welcome to Inclusion by Design.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uma, for having us.
So, let's start with a little bit about yourselves and the group that you work with, the target community that you work with. I would like to understand a little bit more about that.
Okay, so about myself, I have been working in Anjali for a little more than the past 3 years, and it's definitely been my first foray into mental health. So before that, I had a purely academic background. So I came into it without knowing the what, why, and how of working in a field or being in direct contact with the field. So that's how it started, and Anjali works with Anjali works in institutions as well as communities.
Okay.
So as far as we both work in a very there's a lot of synergy. But if you ask me specifically, I work in the hospital program, and Anjali works in 4 state-run mental hospitals in West Bengal, where we run what we call the social recovery program. It's the Voices Project, where we work with social recovery because we believe that while medical recovery is important, it's not enough. Because we essentially look at mental health, from a rights-based lens, from a social justice perspective, as you started with. So yeah, briefly, that's what I work on.
Yes, so I am Kathakali. I've been working in Anjali for about 6.5 years now. So as Biyadi said, even for me, I joined fresh out of university as a research and documentation person in Anjali. I had no deep understanding of mental health before I joined Anjali. As I joined Anjali, I got to understand not just what mental health rights is about, it's also about what working within state-run mental institutions is about, what working within communities is about, and how working with, I think, the government is also about. So I think that was one of the biggest eye-opening thing for me. If I'm talking about, I currently work as a head of programs where I look at all the programs and work very closely with Piyadi and Ratnadi, who is the director of the organization. In terms of what Anjali does, I will not repeat what Piyadi has already said, but I would maybe add a little bit to it, along with the institutions that we work in, where we work in collaboration with the state government. We also work in resource poor communities of West Bengal. Where we train local self-help group women as community mental health professionals who kind of take the work of mental health within the communities. So here also the focus has been on social inclusion and on integration and how we can create community ecosystems and an awareness on not just mental health but about rights. And the whole idea is a very 360-degree idea where we are not just talking about mental health, but we're looking at mental health through the psychosocial lens, where we are talking about safe drinking water, to where we are talking about the social entitlements that one doesn't get and its impact on mental health. So if you're not talking about that, especially in a resource poor communities, we cannot connect it to mental health, because just talking about hi, how are you doing doesn't work, because we're not talking about the other socio-economic, cultural issues that a person is experiencing.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's something very important.
Yeah.
That's the crux of what we
Yeah.
do, because
Yeah.
nowadays mental health conversations are happening, but a lot is about, okay, mental health is important.
Yeah.
It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of limited to that, we feel. And what we kind of really want to talk about more is that mental health doesn't just happen in vacuum. It has deep intersections with socioeconomic realities.
Yeah, so if I can just add with her, so the idea of why we move away from the biomedical model of mental health is also because it looks at only the individual. So if you have an issue, it's your problem, you have to fix it, be it through
True.
medicines, be it through counseling, etc. But our lens has always been looking at it through an intersectional one, through looking at it through the socio-cultural, economic, all of these factors, because an individual's mental distress or an individual's mental health condition is not their own. There are so many other factors which have an impact on that individual. So it's more than putting the onus on the individual, but rather on the system. Basically, it's also challenging and questioning the system, which doesn't happen much, unfortunately.
Very true. I mean, there is this. I was reading somewhere, but this very interesting concept that if a plant is dying, we don't say that it's a wilting plant syndrome.
Yeah.
We take the plant, we then put the fertilizers, take it out in the sun, give it the air it requires, and
Yeah.
the light it requires, and then the plant blooms back
Yeah.
again. But when it happens to human beings,
Yeah.
it's like it's then localized into that particular individual. Oh, that person is having a mental or an emotional difficulty, and that person is having this syndrome or that symptoms,
Yeah.
and label it with certain dysfunctionalities.
Yeah.
As if to say the person exists in vacuum,
Yeah.
and the other things around the person are not affected.
And it's on you.
Yeah.
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 So
And you have to
the
fix
onus
it.
of
Yeah.
the onus of
Yeah.
fixing it and
Yeah.
getting better then suddenly becomes extremely
Yeah.
individualized.
Yeah.
I think this aspect of Anjali, talking about that there is a politics of the ecosystem impacting this individual's mental health, and we cannot depoliticize mental health when we are talking about human rights and mental health rights. I think that's something that it's fascinating, and we will dive more into it. So, as I understand, the communities the groups that you work with, some of them live in institutional care, some of them go back into their host communities, home communities, post the institutional treatment or service that they have received. So this group of people who are living with emotional, mental difficulties, if we had a alienation scale, a scale that measured disconnect, isolation, alienation, if you were to give a score between 1 and 10, where would they be placed on the alienation scale?
I would think I would say about an 8 to 8.5 maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking something between the range of 7 to 9, depending on individual circumstances.
Yeah.
So, can you share a little bit about the kind of alienation, stigmatization, discrimination that the group faces, and how does this, it's like that again has an impact on the mental health. They're already going through difficulties, and then this kind of an alienation, how does it impact? So, if you can give me some examples of the kind of alienation that you've seen.
If I'm talking about alienation, so it's already, the conceived notion of the fact that a person with a mental health condition doesn't have the capacity or the rationality to think, to make a decision. They don't have the potential to make a choice or take charge of their own life, is itself what they live in, be it in the institution or even if they go back to their community. So that's where the first level of alienation happens. And that stigma is so deep rooted that it kind of also becomes an internalized stigma about themselves as well. So that individual also starts believing in the fact that maybe I really can't make a decision, maybe I'm not worthy enough to make a decision, maybe I'm not capable enough to do this or do that. So I think that is one of the examples, and we have seen that if they're like, when you're talking about institutional care, it looks very, I mean, even if the word sounds ki care, the whole idea of care is very problematic when you're talking about institutions, also in the communities where they go back, because it is a system that works a certain way with when it comes to people with mental health condition who have histories of mental health conditions, because even if they have come back home, there is this idea that no, they are not cured, they can do only this much only, so they are supposed to be alienated,
So
they
they're
can't.
Reduced people, reduced capacities.
Yeah, so when we talk about ki social inclusion means that when a person goes back home, they should have the dignity, and they should be able to live life on their own terms, right? They should have access to the rights, they should have access to participating in the community, be it in their home, be it with the family member, be it just being able to go out during a Durga Puja Anjali. They should be able to do things that make them happy. But is it a reality? Not always, unfortunately. Because what Anjali does is tries and ensure all of that, because we keep working with the communities they are going back to. But a community is also about so many different kinds of stakeholders. So it's a difficult process, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think each one of the participants are participants that we work with. Each of their stories can be an example of alienation, isolation, even before they even come to the institution, because many of them have been driven out of their homes, and they wander about, and that's how they end up coming to the institutions. So right to home, access to property, access to just a quality of life is missing. everyday violence, the way they are treated at home, and of course intersections of gender and sexuality come in here strongly. So for women it's harder. We find that women with mental health conditions are often abandoned much more easily than men. So each story can be an example.
I think here also especially women are accepted back home after institutional care also less, because they will not contribute to the quote unquote productivity thing, because men can go back and do work, like they will be able to earn. But I mean, that also I've seen very different in different contexts. Like for example, Purulia, women are taken back way more because they'll be able to go back and work in the fields, do agriculture, contribute financially. But women in especially urban spaces, reintegration and social inclusion happens way lesser.
As compared to men.
Yeah. Because work becomes, and financial contribution becomes an important aspect.
I think even if we go beyond work to our everyday lived experience, I'm sure you have also seen this. I mean, you come across a family where there may be someone with a mental health condition. You will see how they're isolated within the family.
Yeah.
And you probably don't get to see them when you visit them. So that's how it is everywhere.
And if I were to turn the question on its head, that if you were to give share a story or a case study of the transformative power of social inclusion, somewhere you've seen, something that has completely the life of the person and has been transformed because the person was included, integrated, assimilated into the, once the person is back home or in their host communities. If you can share a transformative story like that, that would be very inspirational.
So we had a participant, a resident of our hospital, who had wandered into, somehow he had crossed the borders. So he belonged to Bangladesh. He had crossed the borders and come to this side of Bengal and ended up in an institution, and which was long back, I think 10 to 12 years back. he came into
16 years back.
16 years back. So 16 years back he came into the and for 16 years he sort of we worked with him, not initially perhaps, but gradually we started working with him, and as I said, we work with the social recovery model. So gradually we started having sessions with him through art and other things, and then he also moved into our livelihood unit, and he became a worker in a livelihood unit that we run inside the hospital premise. It's called Dhobi Ghar. It's a laundry that we run, where residents of the hospital work and they earn wages. So this particular person, he started working there, and for years he worked and he earned, and he saved a really, really lump sum amount. And all this while we didn't know how to sort of take him back to his country, because the systems and processes were not so properly in place. In the last 2 to 3 years, partly due to our advocacy and partly due to initiative from the authorities, of course, certain systems were put in place and the repatriation program started. So, and recently we could, and it was a really complicated process of tracing his home, finding his family
Did you remember
members.
all of that?
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
And it was very interesting because when he used to narrate his village, the story of his village, how it looked, he remembered how it was like 16 years back, right? So, we used to kind of connect him through video calls with his son. But when he saw his son was grown up, because when he left, his son was 5 or 6 years old. Now he's an older man, right? He's like this young boy, and he would like, "Acha, you are my son. You looked so different. How are you?" Like, he couldn't connect, and he used to tell me that he used to tell all of us when we were talking about how he's going to go back home, this village and all of that. But phones don't work there. But then we had to tell him, but phones work now. Maybe it was not there 16 years back. But there's just one bank way far away from my home. But then we kind of got information that there are a lot of banks around his home now. So he was kind of stuck there in the past,
And the
which is
world
very
changed.
true. Yeah, it's very true for a lot of the residents who have come to the hospitals, who have stayed in more than like 10-15 years. They are stuck in this bubble. Yeah, I think they're stuck there like 15 years
The
back.
time loop.
Yeah, absolutely.
So finally we could take him back, and we could arrange for his income that he has generated for so many years. And now he has started his own thing, and he works and he uses that money. So I think that's a tremendously transformative story of hope, because once someone starts living in an institution for years, with every year passing by, I think the hope dies a little. But in this case, we could all turn it around.
And also, I think because we were initially not being able to trace his home, once we did, his family just came at the border to kind of receive him, and that was that is what was very important for us, because otherwise once you cross the border we couldn't have connection with him. That was part of the protocol, etc., etc. But because his family came, we were sure that now he's going to be able to go back home, he's going to have that support system. So I think that's really an important story for us.
The stigma is so invisible in cases of social integration and inclusion processes, and it just the stigma, and it thrives because of shame. You talked about shame from the outside and also internalized shame. So in this case, in this gentleman's case, the fact that he was able to go back to a community, a home community, and the family coming to receive him, I think that's a game changer in so many ways. So what is the kind of, if I were to ask, what are the, if you had to design a program that is looking at community inclusion, enabling, facilitating community integration, what are the top three things you would say are it's inevitable, it's mandatory if you want to get the person, the marginalized person, the alienated person back into the mainstream.
I think one of the biggest thing that, especially because we also run a community mental health program, what we have seen is, you know, support from the community stakeholders, be it like the club members to the tea shop that's there, to the municipality stakeholders, the
Panchayats.
councillor, yeah, everybody. I think that is one of the biggest one, because ultimately they are the people who are going to live around them, and they have influences, right, in the community. So if they are into this idea that, yeah, this person had a particular difficulty, disability, that person is back in the community, and that person has the right to live his life here. So I think that is one of the biggest buy-in for us. So yeah, I think that is one of the things I can think of.
I think so. What Katha spoke about is community sensitization.
Yeah.
That is number one. Number two would be, I think, family,
Yeah.
because that's where the person has to live. So, and number three, I think, would be self-stigma that we've spoken about. If these three things, these three pillars in terms of stigma can be dealt with, I think then we have a much better chance of proper social inclusion.
I think also, if I can add here, is I think normalization of a mental distress or a mental health condition. Because where does stigma come from? Because we kind of alienate this as, okay, this is something which happens out of whatever, like it's not quote unquote normal, right? If we kind of question this whole idea of what normal is, and we again normalize that a person can have, like, what we keep talking about, like a person, just like a person can have a physical ailment, a person can have a mental ailment. If you're talking about as simple as that, if we normalize कि अच्छा ये हुआ है, this happens, and the person can get help. So only if it's normalized, also then will this person be able to access help and support. Because a lot of the people that we see in the community can't come for support because there is so much of stigma around it. We have had instances where a woman actually lied in her home saying कि I'm going to the bazaar, and then came to us seeking support from our community mental health professionals, because she couldn't tell. She couldn't talk about distress. That this is what I'm going through, but I can't tell that I'm going to seek help, because then she will be labeled as
Then it
you're a
becomes
person
a
with an
whole
issue.
thing.
Yeah. There'll be terms will be used, but or the fact that you can't go, what's wrong, everything is fine, everything is hunky-dory. So a lot of the people come saying that I can come at this particular time because I'm saying that I'm going out for this work, and if you can manage 40 minutes during this time, then I'll be able to come to you. And nobody wants to kind of share it with their family until and unless they've gone through a few sessions, because there's a lot of backlashes from the community, because a lot of women especially stop coming to us in the to seek support, because once they share it in their homes, there's a lot of backlashes, like, no, you can't go, there's nothing wrong, what are you going to share, what are you going to share about me, especially comes from husbands and families, like, what are you going to share about me with these women.
So hence your work with the family
Yeah.
members and community
Yeah.
members for
Yeah.
that. Okay. Let's come to systemic accountability. How does the organization, or how does Anjali ensure that there is accountability mechanism from the systems, whether it is at the grassroots level or at the state level or the national level? What is the kind of work on systemic accountability for social inclusion of people living with mental and emotional difficulties?
On one level, I would say Anjali has been part of the drafting committee of the Mental Health Care Act, which came into effect in 2017. Anjali played a big role in kind of changing the way we look at mental health and incarceration and admission into institutions and community care at the same time. On the I think in context of the local and grassroots level, to be very honest, I don't know whether there are a lot of policy and systemic mechanisms in place. Our work has been around buying in systemic accountability, be it while we're working with the municipalities or the gram panchayats, but it is not systemic per se, because it's the advocacy we do and the changes that we see, but it's not part of the system.
So as in it's
Yet.
not in the policies,
No,
not
not
ingrained
yet.
in the...
Not yet. For example, there is the district mental health program, right?
Yeah.
And there is a structure where there are certain kinds of people who are supposed to kind of take care of community mental health of that community. But unfortunately, given the lack of bandwidth of that DMHP structure in each district, we have interacted with a lot of social workers who are associated with DMHP. It's not functional in the way it's supposed to. Like, for example, if I'm giving you a small example, if DMHP in, for example, Purulia has to go to each block and do sensitization awareness, it happens maybe once in 2 or 3 months. So
Okay.
even if you're creating awareness, if a person needs access to care or support, where do they go to? So that system itself it's, I would not say dysfunctional, but I think there's a lack of bandwidth and resources to kind of manage the people who would need support. So there is a lot of gap there. And we have also received informal invitation from the DMHPs, 1 or 2 of the DMHPs, where we can collaborate, but that has not yet happened. But we look forward to doing that because Anjali works in the community, and essentially DMHP is supposed to do the work that Anjali's community mental health program does. Unfortunately, it doesn't as of yet, but I hope that we'll be able to build a kind of collaboration where we can kind of support the DMHP for a while to kind of maybe build stronger systems in place.
In comparison, I think we do have the Mental Health Care Act, which kind of takes care of the hospital or the institutional
care.
because that is a policy level intervention, and that is something that Anjali. So when we work, for example, we always have that document to refer to, because we sort of play the role of vigilant, a vigilant force within the. Of course, there is a spirit of collaboration, but we are also a vigilant force within the hospitals. So, of course, just because something is there as an act doesn't mean that it's practiced. So, our role is to make sure that, to hold the authorities accountable, to raise questions, to constantly lobby, because despite the act being in place, large part of the system is still either unaware or not completely willing to comply.
Yeah.
So this kind of vigilance or kind of a monitoring or auditing of what exists on paper, the spirit of the policy DMHP in paper, and what's getting deployed or implemented, and the gap between this. So these kinds of audit reports, are there systems of reporting? Does it happen to the NMHP then, and how does that pan out? How is the response to these kinds of audit reports or gap analysis reports? Why it's happening? How can these holes be plugged to enable more community inclusion? What's the response of the government to that? So for example, if it's a panchayat and does the panchayat member know, does that particular gram panchayat know how can I contribute to the inclusion and assimilation and integration of this particular community member, and what are some of the do's and don'ts, and if I'm unable to, then where can I seek help, or where does my accountability die? So
I don't think, very sadly and unfortunately, I don't think there is. And also, I think in this context, it's important to mention it's very subjective as well, Like if a Panchayat Pradhan is empathetic or is kind of a little aware of the nuances around a mental health condition or something like that, he or she would be way more into supporting or providing support to the community as and when needed, but it's very ad hoc
and very
unfortunately.
individualized.
This
becomes very individualized.
Yeah. So
rather than systemic.
so where Anjali works in, if Anjali works in that particular gram panchayat, it becomes a little easier, but because through advocacy, but it's not, again, as I was saying, it's not systemic in a way. Also, anecdotally, if I could mention, is also like, for example, the MHCA is there, but
What is MHCA?
the Mental Health Care Act. It's been there since 2017, but its implementation has been a struggle, has been a huge struggle for so many. It's been about 8 years now.
Yeah.
The state mental health authority, which is supposed to form, which is
Yeah,
supposed to
I was
have a
thinking of
board
that.
of members who are going to, where there are going to be representations of people with lived experiences of mental health conditions. That has happened very recently in West Bengal, where
It is still happening.
it's not yet done. The committee has not yet been formed. So
Even after 8 years.
yeah. So, Anjali has advocated for the formation of the SMH, the State Mental Health Authority, for so many years. It's still currently in the process of formation. Interestingly, we have also had 2 of our participants whose representations have been accepted. But still, we don't know where it's going to go, what's going to happen around it, when it's going to get finally formed, and when it's going to start working and functioning. So even after 8 years, for example, independent discharge. So the Mental Health Care Act says that when an individual is admitted in the hospital, that person shouldn't stay in the hospital for more than 90 days to 180 days at the maximum. Because after that, quote unquote, getting better or recovery doesn't need to happen within the hospital, right?
Okay.
The person doesn't need to stay
live
within the
yeah,
hospital.
yeah.
Second, the fact that the person can discharge himself or herself. But for that to be implemented, despite the act being there, had to be done by Anjali in West Bengal. And it still doesn't happen in all the other states in the country. If these are not supposed to be responsibilities of non-profit organizations. These organizations have to advocate, because the system, despite being there, doesn't work, doesn't function.
And there also needs to be a synergy in terms of awareness of the act. It's not enough. For example, from Anjali, we do a lot of sensitization, say, with the caregivers of the hospital. And now, after these many years, most of them know about the do's and don'ts, how to treat a patient, what not to do with a patient. But, is that enough? Because it also needs to, the higher authorities need to know about it. Outside of the hospital, the judiciary needs to know about it. We have seen that, within the judiciary there is a lack of awareness, despite it being a legal act.
Yeah. The
police needs to know about it. Otherwise, it doesn't work out. So, the awareness needs to happen at all levels.
Is Anjali's advocacy program on policy? Do you network with other organizations across India who may also be working in similar spaces around mental health to build a joint advocacy
voice
program
at the national level?
I think here too we do it, but it's not like a systemized thing.
Or it's not around the act per se.
Even if it's around the act, for example, CMHLP, Soumitra Pathare, he was also part of the drafting committee and the formation of the MHCA, Mental Health Care Act. I think there are conversations around it about how we can take it forward, but it's not like a set or systemized thing that we'll work together and
let's
do
collaborate
it.
At a national level, organizations coming together to work on this.
It happens a little bit on an individual organization basis.
What could be some of the barriers you think that stop the organizations to come together at a national level? And because the Mental Health Care Act, what needs to be done? How is it dysfunctional? You're auditing it. You're reporting it. You're doing this in West Bengal. You're saying that there are other organizations working in other states on the same thing. So what could be the barriers of this becoming like a unified voice at the national level?
There's no barrier per se.
There is no, actually. Because a lot of organizations working on mental health does that in their own spaces of work, but turning it into a unified voice on a national level, on an advocacy, hasn't happened as of yet. So I don't exactly know.
So let's systemically, if I were to look at it, So there are different organizations working on mental health across India
Hmm.
who have a stake
Mm.
in a strong policy formulation and enforcement.
Hmm.
All organizations, to greater or lesser extent, find a gap between what was drafted 8 years ago and what is actually getting implemented, and not really knowing what's functional, what's dysfunctional, what's done very well, what's not done very well. That kind of a sense making hasn't really happened. There is no, one, I hear you saying there could be a lack of initiative, that nobody is really taking the initiative to create that space for
To
consolidation.
collaboratively.
It could be barriers at individual
Huh.
levels, you know, like every organization. I don't think, I mean, probably we don't have the bandwidth also always to sort of take that initiative. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, এটার উত্তরটা I also exactly
হ্যাঁ,
don't
না, না,
know.
তুমি বলো কি বলছিলে?
So the usual barriers, and I'm generalizing it across contexts, are one of the barriers could be that everybody's energies are so focused on the grassroots work
Yeah.
Yeah.
that
that's
there
what I was
isn't
saying.
enough energy left
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
systemic work at a macro level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The second barrier could be about a potential threat of competitiveness. That as long as you are working in one state and I'm working in another state, it's okay, all right. But the minute you're talking about bringing in a collective space to talk about national, it's not so much of a unified voice as much as a consolidated voice, where it also has spaces
For differences.
For differences. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, so it could be an unconscious avoidance of potential conflict, yeah, and competitiveness. The third could be actually, difficulties in leadership. Sometimes there isn't any leadership who's pulled towards building the bigger picture. So if I've given you 3 options, there could be more, right? One could be just a lack of vision. Yeah. What do we see the potential? Because the Mental Health Act was developed, as you say, through a participatory process.
Yeah.
So it has a lot of inputs and energies and envisioning by a lot of visionaries. All right. So it was, I'm sure that it went, it drew from a collective vision of what an ideal system should be or can be, or what should we be working towards.
Yeah.
But then to look at how has it gotten implemented, what have been the barriers, what have been the challenges, and to look at those kinds of complexities, it requires leadership capabilities of a certain kind. And so, so that could be the other problem is in terms of that there isn't enough energy to hold on to that long-term vision. These are the 3 or 4 possible barriers. If I had to ask you to speculate, that how would you rank these? What would you say is probably the top 1 or 2 barriers?
I think one would be the first one that you mentioned is about the
A very
bandwidth.
obvious one,
Yeah.
because we are so focused on our own
Yeah.
work at a micro level
Yeah.
that we are not taking that plunge to sort of bring about a macro level change.
I think a second could also be that because I have seen the director of my organization consult and discuss things, what's happening in Maharashtra, for example, what's happening in Tamil Nadu around MHCA, but bringing and consolidating it and trying to turn it into a consolidated voice and talk more about it, that has probably not happened. But I've heard discussions around it. I've heard this is happening in Maharashtra, but this is working, this is not working. But those are all informal
No, but
conversations.
but if we had to rank, how does that fit into this is the question.
Because I think that then there is, I think, lack of investment
Yeah.
into turning it into a more consolidated approach, I guess.
The issue of social inclusion. So there is a commonality, let's say, between the experiences of a person who has suffered from psychological distress, illnesses, distress, etc., and that person's finding the agency and power back in society. And this is a common experience between many other marginalized populations.
Mm.
Let's say, for example, street children, or
Mm.
children in conflict with the law, or trafficked persons, or people who have, we were hearing yesterday, people who have been sentenced to into prisons, and
Mm.
when they get back to their families, they go through the same kind of stigma. Now, of course, one might say that a person who suffered from mental illness is a victim, whereas this person is a perpetrator, and that but that's set aside. But there are many other populations, sex workers, for example, or so multiple populations have the same challenges around social inclusion.
Right.
Is there any forum, space, any work that you see that is happening, or where the issue of social inclusion between these multiple populations is getting addressed through a certain intersection approach?
I think we have networks like
Yeah.
Ep03, but
And
I mean,
NDUM as well.
yes,
Yeah.
newly formed.
Yeah.
What is NGO?
So it's called
Nari
Nari
Dibosh
Dibosh Ujjapon
Ujjapon.
Monsho, which is a newly formed network that has,
Yeah.
I think Anjali is a founder member of this network, where conversations around women from multiple
Working women and
multiple
their,
disciplines and
yeah, and
where
their
they're talking,
distress.
distress and multiple layers of marginalization and vulnerabilities are being talked about, and the lack of access to justice, the lack of access to rights, and it's focused on working women where
Yeah. So, for example, like bidi workers and their issues, to say,
sex workers and
sex
their
workers,
issues.
even women drivers,
Yeah.
women medical representatives not having toilets. It's like the issues are very wide, but that is a body that has come into shape recently.
So in the, I know you've been in the organization last 6 years and 3 years, and but in your work in this journey, have there been moments in your journey where you had to confront your own biases or own prejudices or assumptions about the groups that you were working with? What have, if you can share one or two of them, and how were you confronted with that? How did you navigate that?
I think follow.
Yes, I would say, very honestly speaking, that I had a lot of preconceived notions and assumptions about, people with mental illness or people with mental health conditions, how they behave, how they act, and internally I had them. Of course, these days we are politically correct and we don't really say that this is
How
what
we
we
are feeling,
think.
yeah.
Yes, but internally I think I really had no clue. I came in with an open mind, but I had these assumptions that how the interior of a mental institution might be, as we often see in films and TV, and actually it's nothing like that. It's they're represented to be a much more, I think, threatening space than it really
Actually,
is. It's a very regular space. When I came into work, and people really scared me, people around me. When I tell them, even today, when I tell them that I work with hospital people, they're like, you go inside mental hospitals, are you safe? What are the precautions you take? So then I have to sort of tell them that it's nothing like that, but I myself also had these apprehensions. So I also kind of understand when people have these ideas. So it's easier for me to sort of explain to them that it's nothing like that.
That you also had started with these thoughts, and how you have now grown.
One of the biggest, I think, stereotypes that exist is that you have a mental health condition means you are aggressive.
Absolutely.
That's one of the biggest, I think, misconceptions that people have. And when you actually look at numbers and statistics, I can show you from, the hospital statistics, or even in general, the work we do, it's a very, very specific and small percentage who may exhibit signs of aggression. So largely people with mental health conditions are not aggressive.
There's this theory called the social contact theory, where it talks the more you interact with people any group, people who we have certain assumptions about, the moment you start interacting with them, there is a contact with them, it changes. Because we have, for example, it could be a tribal group, it could be the queer community, it could be people with mental illness, it could be so many different kinds of groups, it could be sex workers, it could be so many different kinds of groups that we have, like acha, they behave
like
a certain
this,
way, they are like this, they
It
dress
could
in a
be
certain
women.
way. Yeah. But the moment you start interacting, your assumptions change. I think that's very
And the
important.
stereotypes start breaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is, I think for both of us, I think for most people who didn't have an idea about, especially working within an institution, that has been a great learning experience for us. Yeah.
Great. So, because you talked about films and art and literature, so tell me something. How do you see the storytelling of this community, about this community? How do you see it being portrayed in films, art, literature, and what do you like about this kind of portrayal? What are you very angsty or angry about?
I think mainstream media and films have always, again, shown them as the other, the quote-unquote aggressive ones, the quote-unquote not normal people.
While we are talking about representation in films, it's perhaps also important to acknowledge and mention things that have been done. For example, of course, Aparna Sen has made films such as 15 Park Avenue, such as Paromita Raktin, where people with mental illness have been
Portrayed in a particular
light, portrayed as part of family, and so that I think needs a special mention while we are speaking about this.
Yeah, there's an effort to change the narrative in certain ways. True. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this lovely conversation. I'm
Thank
very
you.
grateful, Katha and Piya,
Thank you
for
so
this
much.
conversation. So that's the end of this episode of Inclusion by Design. I hope this conversation has sparked something for you on inclusion, equity, and belonging, which can be created by design, by intent, and by commitment. Social inclusion. Till the next conversation. See you.
বন্ধু আমার না পেয়ে তোমার